Well, hey guys, as you probably expected, it's me, Mr. Gallion. I'm answering a number of questions that you guys asked me about politics and the stuff we covered in the last section, which I think was 8.4, if I remember right. I don't have a huge number of questions. I only posted that yesterday, but I want to get you a video before I give you tomorrow's information. And if you have more questions, man, I'll absolutely take them. In fact, I'll probably put the political questions link both in the place where I posted this and then down in the description. So keep asking me questions about politics, especially if this sparks anything or if you want to discuss anything else. So I'm just going to take these in no particular order. Some of them I have more to say about than others. Some of them I might even need to think about a little more. But you guys have some really good questions. And the first one is one that I think is a great question. The first thing that I was asked was, could you go more into the political beliefs of other parties like the Libertarian or the Green parties? And yeah, I absolutely can. The Libertarian Party and the Green Party are both kind of parties that center around a particular issue, and that informs everything that they do. Okay, so the Libertarians believe that the most important thing is liberty and freedom, and that everything else comes below that. Okay, so if you're taking issues like safety or freedom, they're always going to go with freedom over safety. So right now, in this particular scenario we find ourselves in with the coronavirus and lockdown, they would say lockdown is stupid. People should be able to make their own choices about whether they go out or not. Okay. When it comes to gun control, they would say, well, no, liberty, your freedom to own a gun always trumps the concern of other people's safety. They would say, if you don't feel safe, go buy a gun yourself, right? They believe the government should stay out of most issues. So when it comes to drugs, if you're a hardcore libertarian, you'd say, man, we want legalization of drugs because people should make their own choices. When it comes to abortion, again, a hardcore libertarian would say, we believe that individuals should be able to make their own choices, get the government out. The government's job is to protect us largely from foreign invaders, and everything else, you should be able to protect yourself. You should be able to make your own choices. Government should get out of everything. Now, I will tell you that I'm not a libertarian, okay? I think that they downplay safety and the fact that sometimes I've got to sacrifice some of my own freedoms for the safety and security of others. That's my belief. Okay, you might disagree with me, and that's fine. But the reason I mention that is that you might believe differently than that, or maybe an actual libertarian would describe it differently too, okay? I'll talk about that in a second, but the best way to learn about a Libertarian or a Green Party member, Republican or Democrat for that matter, is to go talk to one and say, what do you believe and why do you believe it? As far as the Green Party, their major concern is, as you might guess, the environment. All right, so if there's an issue about should we increase taxes on corporations so that we could help the environment in some way, they would say, yeah. Is it right to regulate corporations further so that we can protect the environment? They would say, yeah, every time. So really that desire to protect the environment is going to really push them forward in everything that they do, okay? Now, they have policies about other things, but they're always going to try to connect as much as they can back to what's best for their environment. That makes them kind of like the Democrats, but the Democrats in some places, believe it or not, would actually draw some lines and say, oh, that's too far, we're not willing to go there. And the Green Party is always willing to go there if it means protecting the environment. Okay. Somebody says, and I was just referring to this, as a conservative, they say, I'm open to listening to different sides of topics. I would argue that should be true whether you're conservative or liberal or whatever. I don't think that's a uniquely conservative position. Okay. They say, I like to know what these other people are thinking and where they're coming from. Why do you think in today's age, especially teens, are so sensitive and closed-minded? Well, I hate to tell you, it's not just teens, right? It's everybody. This is an issue that I've been thinking a lot about lately. We are really bad at doing a couple things. One is we're really bad at going to data ourselves. We like to find people to interpret data for us, and that sometimes puts us in a weird situation. So we're not really good at finding good data. Sometimes we look at data, but it's incomplete. We're not good at analyzing, is this a good set of data? Is it not a good set of data? What's going on? We're not good at that. Secondly, we aren't really good at being critical about how other people interpret data. So what we do is we say, I know I like this guy. I tend to be Republican, so I watch Fox News. I tend to be more Democrat, so I watch MSNBC. And then because we know we like more or less what the people are saying, we listen to it and we agree without critically thinking about it. And that's not great, okay? Because this is what we call in political theory the echo chamber. In other words, you just keep hearing the same voices and the same ideas presented again and again and again. And they get louder, and the idea that anything else could be entertained is unthinkable, okay? And that's bad. So that's true whether we're talking about political issues, whether we're talking about, even to some degree, I'd say religious issues. Don't go to a Democrat to learn what a Republican believes about abortion or about gun control. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're always going to give a skewed view. I wouldn't necessarily, and I think that, again, I don't want to get too far off in the religion stuff, but I think if you really want to find out what a Catholic believes, for example, and you're not Catholic, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go to a Presbyterian minister. Although, I mean, they can give you general stuff, but if you never actually engage with somebody that believes differently than you, how do you know what they really believe? Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have got to be really critical about this data. We have to ask questions like, is it a complete set of data? Who put this data together? Do I believe them? There's all kinds of data out there that gets put out there about how, chocolate is really good for you. It's a health food. Well, if you go back and you look, a lot of those studies are, I got my dog here. Come here, Indy. A lot of those studies are actually funded by candy companies. Of course, candy companies are going to say that chocolate's good for you. Okay, so you gotta look at that information. Just because somebody did a study doesn't mean it's a good study, right? So are there flaws with the way they collected data? Just because you want the data to be true doesn't make it true. Man, that is so true of this whole coronavirus thing. Yeah, it's a mess. Like, I want there to be no problem so we can all go out and do stuff right now. That doesn't mean that I should look at the first study that supports that and be like, see, I have evidence, right? I need to look at that study. I need to look at other studies. I need to weigh them against each other and then make a decision, okay? We're really bad at listening to the other side and considering it with an open mind. Because I hate to tell you, but I'm not right all the time, and neither are you. So you got to keep analyzing to figure out what's going on. And then I would say, even after you make your decision, you need to be willing to change it in the face of new information. And again, we're really bad about that. We just kind of hunker down even further, and it's rough. Okay. The next question. Oh man, this could be a whole video by itself. Somebody says, I know it's controversial, but how can a Christian support abortion? Well, the answer is that depends what kind of Christian you are, I would say. If you're a conservative evangelical Christian and you believe that life begins at conception as a result of your religious beliefs, you're going to have a really hard time saying, yeah, I think that abortion is legit. Now, if you say, hey, I don't believe that abortion begins at conception, I don't think that the Bible teaches that, then I think not abortion, but life begins at conception, then it's way easier to say, so therefore, abortion would be okay and morally correct. Now, again, I want to point this out. There is a distinction in politics between saying, and again, this is just kind of me taking a step back. I'm not telling you what I believe or what you ought to believe, but it's something you got to think about. There are people who say, I believe that abortion is morally wrong, but it's the choice of the individual whether or not they do it. That is Joe Biden's position, actually, which I think is interesting. He says it's wrong, but I don't think it's the position of the government to make your moral decisions for you. And this is even a question about religion and politics that's even greater. Should your religious beliefs dictate other people's moral choices who don't share your religious convictions? And that's a tough question, which maybe that's the way that a lot of religious or Christians get around it. I do know a number of people who claim to be Christians who also support abortion very passionately. I disagree with them very strongly. Sorry, I just gave you my position. But again, it's for religious reasons. I think it's really hard to do that. I am more than happy to engage you guys in this and discuss it with you. And you know that if we were in class, we probably would, until I had to be like, okay, cut it off, we're done. Somebody, I think it's the same person, says, here are some thoughts. I think that maybe people say that the baby being aborted isn't a baby, and yeah, that's pretty much what I said, that if you don't believe life begins at conception, it doesn't begin until later in the pregnancy, then it's much easier to get around. Some people say the radical left are standing outside of research facilities opposing the killing and experimentation of animals. Why not innocent babies? Well, okay, first of all, you have to understand that when you say the radical left, you're painting liberals as a monolithic group. In other words, you're saying they're all the same, and they're not. You don't find a huge number of liberals who are going to go protest out in front of an animal, processing plant or whatever. Most of the people who are going to do that are more liberal, for sure. But just because somebody's liberal doesn't mean they're going to protest for animal rights, okay? There are an awful lot of people who would say, yeah, I eat meat. I think we ought to, test medicines and maybe even cosmetics on animals, who are liberal. So when you say the radical left, you got to be really careful, because not all conservatives believe the same thing. Not all liberals believe the same thing, okay? So yeah, I do think it's, again, me personally, I have a really hard time saying let's stick up for the rights of animals, but not unborn children. Now, again, it all comes back to, when does life begin? If it's at conception versus if it's not at conception, we have two totally different arguments going on there, okay? And then finally, do I think California should break off the United States and become its own country? Boy, that's a tough one, because the United States is clearly very, very different. California versus Texas versus South Carolina versus Maine. You could argue that we should actually be 50 different countries and not one united country, because we have such different priorities. Would that be for the best? Man, I don't know. Even saying that California is just a bunch of crazy people, though, is painting California with too broad of a brush, right? Almost half of the people in California are actually conservative, vote Republican, okay? So I know California's laws do tend to be a lot more stringent and maybe restrictive. There are reasons for it, and I think that their voice is really important when we have these national debates about things, even if we disagree about it. Would we be talking about, straws should use a metal straw versus a plastic straw, if not for what California is doing? Maybe not. But it's definitely something that adds to our national discussion, and that's okay. I think having lots of voices is a good thing, even if we don't agree with them, even if we think, man, they're taking it way too far. Ultimately, because California is part of the United States, if people in California don't like living there, they think it's crazy, they can hop in a U-Haul and move across country and come to a state they like better. And honestly, so can you if you live in South Carolina and you don't like the politics here, the positions. You can hop in a vehicle and move somewhere else. And some of you will do that, and that's great. Not because I want to get rid of you, but you're just taking advantage of your freedoms, okay? Man, I think those are the big questions I got. This is already longer. Oh, there's one more about the coronavirus. Whew, that's a good question. Tell you what, I will answer it, because why not? Somebody says, this probably sounds really cynical. I don't really have an opinion on it. Who or what is to blame for COVID-19 in America? I know that some people blame Trump, some people blame opposing political parties, and some people just find anything to blame. Where essentially did we go wrong? We had a warning well in advance from China and Eastern and European countries, but we still fell to the pandemic. Was it something we did do? Was it something we didn't do? This is a tough question. Oh, man. This is a tough question, because personally, I feel like the federal government could have done a whole lot more in ramping up testing, in maybe locking things down sooner than they could. But there are lots of videos out there of elected officials, I would even argue one in particular, downplaying the threat of the coronavirus and saying look, there's only one case out in California, there are almost no cases, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. And the counter argument, that's Trump. The counter argument is that he says, look, I knew it was an issue and I was moving, in the background, but you don't want the president getting on TV and causing alarm and being like, we're all going to die. And I get that. At the same time, should we have been moving a lot faster to ramp up testing to limit people coming into the United States? and taking this really seriously, maybe considering lockdowns before it was a problem so that it could be minimized and we could figure out how to trace these things. Yeah. Now, realistically though, can you make sure that we have a complete lockdown and no virus gets into the United States? No. People are saying, look, this is proof that borders work. This is proof that we've got to lock down a whole lot more because, you know, when we don't, bad things happen. And the reality is bad things are going to happen, okay? Ultimately, let's say it got into Canada, but it delayed coming into here because of lockdowns. Well, we have connections to Canada. People come in legally from Canada all the time, or Mexico, or on planes, okay? There's even some evidence that the strain that came in New York, that came from New York, may have actually come first of all to China, but then to Europe, and then to New York. So, look, bad things are going to happen, and I think there is some blame. I think the government could have done a lot more to prepare people for it, but of the country for it, that maybe would have minimized what happened. But there's no country that had no incidence of the coronavirus. New Zealand's done a really good job of locking it down, of, you know, keeping it out. They have claimed victory over it. We'll see if that's true or not. But New Zealand's a tiny island country. They can, you know, shut down airplanes and lock people in their homes for a while, for a couple weeks, and you don't have any new cases. We're way too big for that. So, I think there's blame, but I think that ultimately it was going to happen one way or another. We could have been better prepared, and hopefully we will be before this ever happens again. But man, that's a rough one. So sure, yeah, there are political questions there about that, but man. All right, I'm really sorry this has taken as long as it is. It's almost 17 minutes. If you have any more questions, stick them down either in the comments or in wherever. You got 20 different ways to get them to me, okay? I'd love to talk more about politics with you because this is U.S. history and that's what we do. All right, take care. See you soon.